Hello, I'm Marcia McNutt. I have just stepped down recently as president of the National Academy of Sciences. I'm here in Steamboat to talk about the state of science in America. One thing I have learned as I've gotten older is that if something hasn't happened in your own lifetime, you tend to think that it can't happen. And actually, I don't think today there's a single person who can remember a time when U.S. science wasn't world leading. But sadly, that is no longer the case. Because we have been complacent about U.S. leadership in science, we have let it slip. And we've let it slip in ways that have allowed other nations to take over, particularly China. Now, the good news is, this isn't something that we can't repair if we just put our minds to it. What put the U.S. ahead more than 70 years ago was the fact that the U.S. was very good at innovating. And so what we need to do is pick ourselves up and innovate again. But we can't do that unless the American public appreciates how important science is for our quality of life, for our national security, and for our health. So today, my hope is to convince everyone that American leadership in science is important, but it's at risk. And we need to innovate if we are going to regain the lead. And I'll give several examples of ways we can innovate and regain that lead. Hope you enjoy the presentation.
Good evening, and welcome to the 24th season of Seminars at Steamboat. I'm Mitch Wallerstein. I have the honor to serve as board chair of Seminars. This evening's seminar is the first of 5 weekly, nonpartisan talks on an eclectic mix of domestic and international public policy topics. The Seminars board has worked hard since last summer to select topics that address some of the most important issues of the day and to identify nationally prominent speakers to address each one of them. On behalf of the board of directors of Seminars at Steamboat, I want to express our sincere thanks and appreciation to all of the sponsors and other donors who make this speaker series possible. Your support enables us to bring these impactful presentations to the Steamboat community without an admission charge. This week, we especially want to thank an anonymous donor who is tonight's sponsor, and we'd also like to thank and recognize the following supporting sponsors: Abby Meiselman and Ken Bloom, Rich and Therese Pareco, and Ann Van Cleek and Jim Smeeting. Please join me in thanking them. Private donations make up 90% of the resources that are required to operate Seminars at Steamboat, and they are essential if this program is to continue, and if it is to continue to be offered free of charge. Thus, if you find these talks interesting and valuable, I urge you to contribute whatever you can afford, either by going to our website, seminarsatsteamboat.org, or by using the donor QR code printed on the back of your program. Let me note that we are getting the 24th season of Seminars started with a topic of great importance, namely whether the United States is at risk of losing its strength and its leadership in science. This is not an esoteric or academic question. It lies at the heart of what has made the United States the undisputed world leader in science, producing more Nobel Prizes than any other country. Scientific research has served as the driver of many new technological breakthroughs in multiple fields that now power our economy in an age of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and dramatic developments in the life sciences. But all of this is now at risk. Just this past week, the Association of American Universities reported that there had been a 15% drop in the number of students admitted to PhD programs at the top 50 research universities. and this is due primarily to the severe cutbacks in support for scientific research that is provided by the federal government. So with that by way of preface, let me now welcome Walt Dabbert to the stage. Walt was my predecessor as board chair of seminars at Steamboat, and he is himself a distinguished meteorological scientist. Walt will introduce this evening's speaker, Dr. Marcia McNutt, and he will moderate the Q&A session that follows. Walt, the podium is yours.
Good evening. I want to start with a little bit of history. In March of 1863, during the middle of the Civil War, the U.S. Congress passed a piece of seminal legislation when it established a new non-governmental body that would provide advice to the U.S. government that would be objective, evidence-based, and it would be on matters of science and technology. The act was signed into law by President Abraham Lincoln, thus creating the National Academy of Sciences. 153 years later, in 2016, the members of the Academy elected Marcia McNutt as its first president and its first ever woman president. And for very good reasons. She is an accomplished scientist, she's an effective leader, and she has a long record of experience in various domains of science. The Academy limits the president to 2 terms, and Dr. McNutt completed her second term just 2 weeks ago. McNutt, you might say, started her science career in Colorado as she got a BA in physics from Colorado College. She went on to Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where she got a PhD in earth sciences. She holds honorary doctoral degrees in no less than 13 institutions, including the US, Sweden, and the Ukraine. Dr. McNutt herself is a member of the National Academy of Sciences, as well as the National Academy of Engineering, the American Philosophical Society, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and has received numerous national and international accolades. Dr. McNutt served as editor-in-chief of the prestigious journal Science, which is the flagship journal of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which has no less than 120,000 members in 90 countries around the world. Prior to her tenure with Science, she was director of the U.S. Geological Survey, and during that time, she responded to a number of major disasters, including perhaps most notably the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. She led a team of government scientists and engineers in Houston who helped contain the spill and eventually cap the well. For her contributions, the Coast Guard gave her the Meritorious Service Medal. Before the Geological Survey, there's a lot to tell you, folks. Before the Geological Survey, McNutt served as president and CEO of the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute in Moss Landing, California, and she was also the president of the American Geophysical Union. I can think of no one better qualified to address the state, the direction, and the importance of science, and the erosion of America's standing as the prominent and preeminent contributor to and the leader of scientific research. and the resulting contributions to societal challenges, to defense, to the economy, and so many other applications. Please join me in giving a warm steamboat welcome to Dr. Marcia McNutt.
Well, thank you so much, Walt, for that long and overly detailed introduction. But it's truly a pleasure for me to be speaking to such a distinguished audience tonight. I'll tell you, Walt is one of your greatest members of the fan club of this group in Steamboat, which has been gathering for many years now to be excited about what's going on in the world and to understand what's important that we have to protect. And for that reason, I'm talking tonight about the current state of U.S. science leadership, because this is a topic that is very, very important to me, and my goal is to make it very, very important to you as well. So, as Americans, we all love winners. That's our sort of national way of celebrating ourselves, is to love our champions. And of course, we all are excited whenever we win an Olympic medal, and we follow the Olympics very closely. Well, it turns out that we are world leading in Olympic medals. The U.S. has garnered, in the modern age, 15% of all of the Olympic medals given out. But that pales in comparison to Nobel Prizes. We have 60% of all Nobel Prizes ever given out. And at 60%, we are not just world leading, we are world dominating. If you add up the Nobel medals of the next 9 nations, they still don't equal how many Nobel medals we have. But, this wasn't always the case. Prior to World War II, Germany was winning the Nobel race. And we didn't take over until after World War II. So we have to ask ourselves, is our Nobel dominance also at risk? Germany lost out. Are we going to lose out too? Well, let me tell you first about how the U.S. came to dominate the Nobels. It was thanks to this man, Vannevar Bush, who was FDR's science advisor. At the end of World War II, he noted that it was science and technology that had won both world wars. And in this document called Science, the Endless Frontier, he argued to Roosevelt and Congress that even in times of peace, the U.S. would benefit from federal investment in science. And so what happened was the report led to the creation of the National Science Foundation. It promoted programs to improve teacher training, and it propelled the U.S. to #1 in the world because we were the first country to have major national investment in its scientific enterprise in times of peace. So what did we get from this report? How did it benefit us? Well, the first thing it did was it gave us insight into the future. Science is the only technique that mankind has ever developed that allows us to predict the future and to predict it accurately. For example, we can now answer the question of what does my DNA tell me about my health? If someone had their DNA done and they've got a BRCA gene, they know what they need to do. Okay, so it makes predictions about our health. Science tells us where storms are going to strike, what part of the coast needs to be evacuated, how fast is climate change coming, how fast do we have to respond to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. Science tells us, how can I modify the structure of a molecule to provide novel, useful properties that create new tools and new products for us? A second thing that science has done for us is it's improved our quality of life. If anyone has ever used the internet or a cell phone or robotic tools to extend our ability to operate our limbs, all of these are thanks to US science. And the third reason why I think anyone should care about federal government supporting science is science and technology are where the jobs are. New jobs, thanks to science, grow twice at the rate of all other occupations, twice the rate. And this just shows in what is predicted from 2024 to 2034, employment change. And you can see the total for all occupations is going to grow by about 3%. For occupations in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, it's going up 8%. And you can see non-STEM occupations will therefore suffer. While it's true, though, that regardless of where basic research is done, usually the whole world benefits. I mean, after all, we have the internet, but so does China, so does Africa. You know, you don't have to necessarily be the first to develop something in order to benefit from it. But there are many areas in science where being first is critical. First one here is national security. National security is one area where we don't share our advances with other countries because we want our own security to be world leading. So our science has to be world leading if our national security is going to be world leading. Economic stability and growth. The best tech transfer from a basic research discovery at a university to industry is the student walking out of the university, going down the street to a company and taking that new discovery. And so what it means is that if you want your economy to grow, you better be producing these students that are taking this new discovery and creating new companies and entire new industries. Ethics and standards are another reason why we want to be first. We want new products to be compatible with our infrastructure. Imagine if someone developed a new computer, but you can't plug it into your wall socket, or you can't connect it to your internet. Being first means it's all compatible for us, and we don't have to have, 220 sockets everywhere or whatever. It also means that it conforms to our ethics. We know there's huge differences in the value of personal privacy in the US versus China. So we want our ethics to also control it. And finally, there's soft power through science diplomacy. Even countries that hate our guts love our scientists and welcome them to their countries. Okay, but unfortunately, our leadership, which has been unchallenged until recently, is in peril. And let me show you why I'd say that. There was an interesting report that was done by the National Academy in 2007 called Rising Above the Gathering Storm. And the very prescient authors of this report looked into the future and made extremely accurate predictions about what would happen to US leadership in science at a time when low-cost labor is readily available everywhere except here, and information is readily available because of the internet. Everyone can get the information, but labor's cheaper elsewhere. He said that is going to lead to US disadvantages in the marketplace and in science because of those two developments. And in this report, they gave several scenarios. I'm going to talk about two of them. One of them was the business as usual scenario. We just continue as we have, funding our science agencies, increasing the amount of money by an inflation factor every year, but just keep doing things according to the blueprint of Vannevar Bush. And what they predicted is that if we continue on that business as usual, we are going to lose our leadership, we are going to lose a world scientific output, our share of it, our share of scientists and engineers will continue to decline, and our ability to attract the best international researchers will also decline. So those were some very dire predictions they made in 2007. So let's go through the list. Have any of them come to pass? Well, everyone has. Okay, first of all, let me show you when this report was written was 2007. If you look at 2007, this is how much every country contributes to the research and development enterprise. You can see that in 2007, the US was world leading by a whole bunch. There was no one that was close to us. And in fact, the nation that was second wasn't even China, it was Japan. And then that's when the report was written, and look how accurately they predicted loss in leadership. This plot is like 2 years old now. China has crossed the line. China is investing more in research and development than the US is right now. The US share of researchers and publications has also declined. Those were two other predictions. If you look at this, actually was interesting because I think this analysis was done by the Japanese. They're our friends. So you would think they would sort of give us a little latitude here. No way. What they show is in terms of numbers of researchers, both in business, universities, and public organizations, number of scientific papers, number of papers in the top 10%, the best papers, and the top 10 and top 1. In every case, number 1 is China. And in some of these categories, we aren't even number 2. So we're definitely losing that leadership, just as the business as usual scenario predicted, and it's already coming to pass. Ability to attract top international talent has declined since 2007 as well. You can see that India was rising, it's stable, but look at how China has dropped in terms of the share of students coming here, and the rest of the world and all other countries as well. The share of students on F1 visas who came here to study but now want to stay to work has dropped 30%. That's a huge drop in the international talent. And you have to understand, these were the best and brightest we were bringing in from these other countries, and now we can't keep them. So all of the predictions from 2007's business as usual scenario have played out. But we are no longer even in the relatively optimistic business as usual scenario. In the past year and a half, we have fallen into what they called the pessimistic scenario. So here's the pessimistic scenario, where America falls behind. And the report committee gave the conditions under which we would move from business as usual to pessimistic. And they said spending on other federal priorities will limit federal and state resources available for science and technology. So rather than budgets inching up with inflation, budgets will actually fall. Increasing attractive opportunities overseas will draw industrial R&D funding and talented US scientists and engineers away from the US, so they will find better opportunities elsewhere. Lack of business incentives will discourage companies from investing in domestic R&D, and excessive regulation of research institutions reduces the money available for actual research. So let's see which of those have played out. Well, as you know, Congress and the champions of science in Congress actually restored some, but not all, of the funding cuts that were in the president's budget. Institutions like the National Science Foundation were slated to be cut 50%. But fortunately, some of that money has gone back, but not all of it. If you look at 2024, the actual money available was $199.3 billion for federal R&D. And in 2025, it dropped by $10.7 billion. But that's not the whole story. Even though agencies got a lot of the money they were expecting, they can't spend it. And they can't spend it because agencies can't get money out the door. Many of their best people who knew how to do grant making were slashed from the workforce. And now all sorts of new government policies are making it very difficult for the staff to get money out the door because it has to be signed off by a political appointee. And there simply aren't enough political appointees to get that much money out the door. Plus, most of the political appointees are not scientists, so they can't even read the title of the proposal. So this is a problem. Another prediction from the pessimistic scenario was that attractive opportunities will draw researchers away from the US. These two plots, the red line is people coming from the rest of the world to the US for research, and the blue line is people from the US going to the rest of the world. You can see for the first time, starting in November of 2024, more researchers are leaving the US than are coming here. And this is, and there were some polls that were done that showed 75% of US researchers, especially early career ones, are looking at jobs overseas. Applications by US researchers for overseas jobs are up by 32%. And immigration policy changes are leading more foreign researchers than ever before to decline work in the US. They don't even want to come here if we offer them a job. And another prediction was that there would be better opportunities elsewhere. I know you can't really read this diagram, but let me just tell you, on the left side are all of the really important areas for research right now. Things like advanced materials, AI, energy and environment, quantum, biotech, sensing, defense. And in the second column, it shows who's leading. In red is China, in green is the US. And the foremost column is whether it's high, medium, or low priority. China leads in every high priority category on that list. And the ones that the US leads in are typically medium to low priority. So, and this is, they're building a monopoly in these areas. Another prediction in the pessimistic case was attractive overseas opportunities will draw industry investment overseas. And remote-friendly roles have grown 42% faster outside the US. Of course, the pandemic was a big trigger for that. But what it means is that 3 million US jobs are being offshored, with a significant proportion being high-paying, remote-capable tech positions. It's a lot of jobs to lose. And the integration of artificial intelligence is making offshoring even more efficient by enabling overseas workers to handle complex tasks, such as software development and customer service. So this is not going to stop. This is going to continue. And then the last prediction was that this pessimistic scenario would be triggered by excess regulation. This plot shows the growth since 1990 up to the mid part of the last decade of regulations. They grew from 1 in 1991 to over 200 today. And this is before a new OMB set of policies go in, which are probably going to increase that by another 50%. So researchers spend now 44% of their research time on regulatory compliance, and not a single one was trained to do that. The inability to get a visa interview has discouraged foreign sciences from studying in the US, and international students are applying for jobs overseas because they can't get a visa to work here. So evidence suggests that we're definitely experiencing the pessimistic scenario of rising above the gathering storm. And so what did the committee predict the impacts would be? Well, they said available talent will drop precipitously. We won't be able to fill jobs. US capitalists will invest abroad, searching for higher returns with cheaper labor. That foreign multinationals will begin to dominate the global markets because they can get the workers and the research is broadly available. And then as innovation investment moves overseas, jobs are going to stall here, wages will stall, and our overall standard of living is going to decrease. And we're already seeing a lot of that happening. Available talent drops precipitously. This is a plot of net flows of top AI talent. Anything above the line means researchers are coming from overseas here to work on AI. You can see the drop during the pandemic. That was a big drop. No one was moving anywhere. But you see that even after it recovered after the pandemic, it has dropped and is now below the line, where AI people are leaving the US to go elsewhere. US capitalists look for cheaper labor and higher returns by investing abroad. You can see the rise in foreign investment by multinationals. And foreign multinationals, they predicted, would begin to dominate global markets. You go back to 2000, and you can see the blue line was US. How many US companies were in the international 500, Forbes 500? When you go over to the right, up till nearly today, you can see that black wedge that grew was China. And China grew at the expense of mostly the US and Japan. So this has already happened. So I guess I'd like to say, while all of this is bad, I think it's actually unlikely that the US can outspend China. They have many more people. It's a much bigger environment. And we also can't compete for the cost of labor with China. So those are not routes that are going to help us. But innovation has always been America's greatest strength. And now I would say it's our only hope. Is there a better blueprint for research in America other than that one that Vannevar Bush did, Science, the Endless Frontier? It gave us more than 50 years of science leadership and another 20 years of being, close to the top. We've lost that now. So can we innovate? And the first question we have to ask is, what has changed? If we come up with a new blueprint, the new blueprint should be set for today, not for 1945. And a lot has changed since 1945. So what are the most important things that need to be part of our new blueprint? Well, the first is, I think Bush actually would be pleased to know that other nations saw how great his blueprint was for America, and they decided to follow it. This plot shows North Korea and South Korea GDP per capita starting back at the end of World War II. North Korea and South Korea were dead even, and they were horrible economies. South Korea's government read Science, the Endless Frontier, and they started investing in science and technology to promote industry. This is one of the most meteoric rises of an economy that the world has ever seen. South Korea took the majority of its population out of poverty and moved them to the middle class in one generation. one generation. So one thing that I don't think Bush anticipated was competition. And South Korea showed competition is happening, and it's happening everywhere. Another thing that I don't think Bush ever would have anticipated is the fact that we have become exceptionally dependent on international students in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. If you look at the percent nationality of grad students and postdocs in the US, you can see that foreign students dominate the graduate students and are nearly equal in terms of the postdoc. So I don't think that Bush would have anticipated that, but the fact that it's happening and now these students are having better opportunities elsewhere means that we've got to fix this problem. And that's just for the students, but even the STEM workforce is dependent on these foreign students. If you look at the bachelor's degree students, master's, and doctorates, you can see that master's degree students are still between 10 and 20%, or bachelors are 10 or 20% are foreign. But by the time you get to PhDs, it's as much as 2/3 in some cases. And the other thing that I'm not sure Bush would have anticipated is how important international partnerships are. Even back when I was in school in the 1970s, a single university could have a state-of-the-art facility. Stanford had SLAC, the linear accelerator, when I was in school. Nowadays, that's not possible. You need national and international investment in order to have state-of-the-art facilities. Examples are CERN, or the space station, or the International Ocean Drilling Ship. All of these are beyond the support of one country can do. So international partnerships are important, and this is something that I don't think was in Bush's original blueprint. And another thing that Bush didn't talk about much was at the time that he wrote it, the government was still investing a lot more in basic research R&D than was industry. But look at how that changed. Starting back in 1953, okay, so industry is the red line, government is the yellow line, and the green is private foundations. And what you can see is that there's been a complete crossover where now industry is supporting 75% of the research and development in the US. And so the kinds of partnerships we need with industry are very different than they were at the time of Bush's report. And another thing is philanthropy has grown. I don't think that Bush, anticipated private foundations like Schmidt and Gates and Moore and the kind of money. And these people all made their money because of the investment that Vannevar Bush had encouraged the US government to make. These people became multi-billionaires and gave their money back to science. So there's no wonder that he didn't anticipate it, but it's a big thing today. In fact, in terms of work at universities, basic research, the federal government is within almost about 10% of how much of the funding comes from private foundations now. So how can we use these new realities to develop a fresh blueprint for research in the US? How can we come up with an improved model which will innovate us and give us another head start over the competition? So the first challenge that I'll talk about is building the domestic scientific workforce of the future. We have been too dependent on foreign countries educating their children well and then sending them here, whereas we have not been doing the same. Our number one vulnerability is this dependence on foreign talent, as they are seeing now better opportunities in their home countries. So why is this such a problem? Well, here's a plot showing science scores on international tests for students in a variety of countries. US is right there in the middle, red. We are middle of the pack. How can we lead in R&D if our students are only middle of the pack? And in math, we're below middle of the pack. We aren't even in the middle yet for math. So this is definitely troubling and is going to make us very hard for us to compensate for the loss of international students. But there is hope. Some people call this the Mississippi Miracle. And if you didn't hear about it, in just 10 years, between 2013 and 2023, Mississippi elevated its student performance in reading and math. Mississippi had been 49 out of 50 states in terms of its ranking. It raised in just 10 years from bottom of the nation to basically upper echelons of all of the states. And they did it by early screening of students to see who was going to need help, intervening early with the students who were going to need it, teacher coaching, and not promoting students to the next class who hadn't mastered the materials. We do that all the time. The teachers don't want to deal with them anymore, so they promote them, and then the whole class gets held back. What this plot on the right shows is that on the 4th grade reading scores, most states have plummeted, and this is between 2013 and 2024, so the same decade where Mississippi intervened. What you can see is that the lone exception on the far right is Mississippi. Their student scores went up while everyone else went down. So I think Mississippi, of all places, has shown us the way, and we need to do this across the United States. Challenge number 2, even though we want to educate our own students and have them competitive, we also want to bring in international students, top international students. You know that if you recruit a soccer team from your neighborhood, it's never going to be comparable to the soccer team that you recruit from the entire state. And our science enterprise, if we only recruit domestically, is never going to be world leading if we can't get the best people from all over the world. So we have to retain our position as a destination of choice for students despite the increasing competition. So in case you needed another reason why we want to continue to attract international people, this is a plot of the proportion of, or the number of CEOs that are coming for the Fortune 500 companies that were either born outside the US or their parents were, so they're first-generation Americans. What you can see is that for immigrants and children of immigrants, it's 47% of all CEOs. Well, if you go around the country and say, yeah, how many immigrants and children of immigrants do we have in the country? It's nowhere near 47%, but they are leading our companies because we have recruited internationally. So what's one of the problems we have to solve if we want to continue to attract the best and brightest international students? Well, one thing we got to worry about is these student visa denial rates that have grown substantially. And this isn't even a current administration issue. This is over the period from 2015 to 2022, shows the difference. In 2015, all the countries in green, basically students weren't being denied to come. Those in red, some of them, as much as 90% were being denied. If you look in 2022, look how different the map looks. I mean, some of it is understandable, but honestly, Canada? Why are we denying Canadians to come here? Peru? Why are we denying all the visas from Peru? And Africa is the only continent that has a growing population of young people. And yet we're denying those young people to come here too. So this is simply crazy. But I think it's a problem we can fix. And it's not a problem, these visas are not being denied because there are too many students applying. The number of students has actually decreased. And so it's not a workload problem. So challenge number 3 is reducing red tape. Some of them are the barriers to these visas, so we can help with the international student problem. We can ease access to visas to retain those people here in the US. But a big problem is we have to reduce the regulatory burden on our own faculty at universities. If they're spending 44% of their time on regulatory paperwork, that means they aren't in the lab. They aren't making science discoveries. They aren't mentoring students. So we've got to fix this. Well, fortunately, there are solutions. The Academy released a report last year on simplifying research regulations and policies. And this report basically provided policy options, and a variety of policy options. So, depending on how you were leaning right or left, some policies might make more sense to accept, but they gave a whole bunch of them that would lead to the same result, but in different methods. But all of them were consistent with 3 principles. We need to harmonize regulations and requirements across federal and state agencies. We don't want to give the same kind of information to both DOD and DOE, but they asked it on different forms with different questions in different ways, so it's double the regulatory paperwork. That makes no sense. Tier the requirements to the nature, likelihood, and potential consequences of risk. If you are a psychologist and you want to do a survey, send a survey out to people, you have to go through the same regulatory paperwork as if you were injecting them with a foreign substance. Now, that makes no sense. And use technology to increase efficiency and simplify the process. AI could probably do 90% of this regulatory paperwork just using the proposal and the lab notes from these experiments. So this problem is solvable. And then challenge number 4, modernize the university-industry relationship or their partnerships. So I think the most important thing we can do is rethink the pathways of these students in science and technology to industry. Right now, and I know there are many PhDs in this audience, it takes 5 years to earn a PhD. And what's different from the time that we were all students from today is when I was a student, I handed in my thesis, I had a job offer in hand. Believe me, that doesn't happen anymore. You hand in your thesis, and you have to go through several years, sometimes 8 to 10 years of postdoc experience before you get noticed. And all of that is at very low wages. Students train for academic jobs that don't exist rather than the many industry jobs that do. When Vannevar Bush wrote his report, most of the education of PhDs was to create a new basic research enterprise at our universities. Now those have flattened out. They aren't hiring new people at the same rate anymore. Most of the students are going into industry. And so we need to train them for those jobs. And you compare this for science with law and business. Students take a 2 to 3 year post-baccalaureate training, and they walk into 6-figure salaries. Why can't we do this in science? And I have to say that this issue is very important to me. I've got 3 daughters here. They're all very good science students. And one of them even went to an international science fair when she was in high school. And when I asked them, okay, which of you are going to become scientists? They all looked at me and they go, Mom, why would we want to be a scientist? We want to have children. We want to have a life. And they didn't want to spend, another 10, 15 years just getting more training. And they wanted to have their family. So Meredith had a 2-year MBA at Berkeley. She's now Director of Real Estate Strategy and Operations at Apple. Ashley, Meredith's on the right, Ashley's on the left. She got a 3-year JD from UC and is now a litigator at Google. And Dana has her own company worth about $100 million with $10 million in annual revenue. And they all own homes that are worth twice what mine is owned. So, you know, this is a problem. Fortunately, again, here there are solutions. I want to talk about this one, Keck Graduate Institute, which is part of the Claremont Colleges now in Southern California. And I talk about this one because it was the first one to set the path, and I was on the committee that designed it. It developed a 2-year program for students not just with backgrounds in science, even business or operations or whatever. And the program integrates science, business, soft skills, and hands-on industry experience. In just a 2-year program, the graduates of the program have achieved notable success and continue advance in their careers, and it's become a national benchmark, inspiring numerous similar programs at universities across the country. And this can be done even at a university that is not one of the top 10 in terms of its facilities for biomedical research or whatever, because the skills these students need to learn, I mean, industry was upset. No student comes out of one of your PhD programs and knows how to do a clinical trial. No student comes out of a PhD program and knows how to get a drug through FDA approval. No student knows how to work as a team. It's all me, first author, me, you know, my thesis, my work. So they're learning an entirely different skill set, and every student in this program walks across the stage with a 2-year degree and has multiple job offers in hand. And many of these students are even supported by industry to go into this program. Okay, challenge number 5. Provide access to major scientific facilities. This plot just shows international authorship in papers from various countries. And you can see without a doubt, every country has to be internationally involved. I remember years ago when I was editor-in-chief of Science, I went to China, and the Chinese researchers there were saying, why are all our papers being rejected from Science magazine? We've got so much great, science that we're doing here. Why don't you publish them? The declination rate for China was the highest anywhere in the world. And I said, look around your lab and look around the labs in other countries. They are all international labs with international students, and they're putting out the best work. You need to get out of your little hole here and integrate internationally. I went back 3 years later. That year, China had 3 cover articles on Science. 3 cover articles. And they had in the same lab North Korean students, South Korean students, Indian students, US students. They had become very international. International science collaboration is, of course, important because I talked about the fact that the facilities are so expensive. But also, when these facilities are in basic research, they pose little concern for economic competitiveness. These collaborations benefit the US and both our science and our scientists. We need to ensure that US involvement is real and proportional to our benefits. But we're recently seeing retrenchment from international collaborations. US is pulling out of a number of large international facilities. And how can we lead if we aren't even at the table in these international pursuits? And let me just give you some example. Another reason to engage internationally is it promotes our values. Like I said, our ethics. These pictures are from a meeting at the Second International Summit on Genome Editing that was at University of Hong Kong in 2018. And many of you will remember this meeting because it is where a young Chinese scientist announced for the first time that he had genetically engineered twin embryos in vivo and before they were born and change their genetic code in a way that was inheritable. So all of their offspring would also get that genetic variation. Well, it was the US that stood up at that meeting and got all other countries to back us on saying, we do not know enough about what are the long-term possibilities in genetic engineering to do this in a heritable way. And so it is now, you can edit in a way that won't be passed down to other generations, but you can't do that. So let me conclude by saying the data are saying that business as usual has failed us, that US is no longer leading in key technologies. It's becoming difficult to rely on immigration, and we aren't even welcoming those people. We're not training professionals for the available jobs in industry the way we should, and we've abandoned international partnerships. But there are opportunities. We could create a new Endless Frontier 2.0, that takes advantage of all the things that have changed. So we can capitalize on that. We can improve K-12 science education, attract the best and brightest from anywhere just by removing these regulatory roadblocks. We have to reduce red tape on our researchers. We have to create university-industry partnerships. We have to benefit from international partnerships, and we also have to make science nonpartisan again. This is the first time in my career that I have seen science become a political football, and we have to stop that from happening. We can do what America does best. We can innovate, and that will give us another 50-year head start on the competition. And then we just sit back again and wait for them to catch up. So thank you very much.
So I'm going to start with what I call the hometown question.
Okay.
In a small town like Steamboat, where we are greatly affected by lots of things that federal science does, whether it's wildfires that we're dealing with today, whether it's the Colorado River and water, whether it's agriculture, etc. Where can we have the most impact? Is it by going to the school boards and promoting STEM education? Is it by going to the ballot box when we vote for members of Congress or state representatives? What do we do?
Yeah. Well, I would certainly say all of the above, and I hope that people will do all of the above. The one thing I'd say about children, this is our investment in the future, and we definitely need to do that, but we aren't going to give them any future to prepare for if we don't make science nonpartisan again. I think one thing that people from a community like this can really do is make the need for science breakthroughs to deal with these problems that are growing real to people. Because when you're talking about water for farmers, or you're talking about wildfires wiping out communities, these are issues that do not have the political polarization of climate change, even though they are the result of it. But people will very much relate to those problems, and so they will want to support science solutions to them.
So I'm going to try to meld two questions. One question asked, is there a Sputnik of the day that will cause the response did 60 years ago? Or is the pessimistic scenario in rising storm, is it a done deal or is it not?
So one concern I have today is that many of our leaders are kind of, I don't know, poo-pooing the fact that, for example, China is now selling more electric cars than we are. They didn't start, we did, but they have now taken over in terms of international dominance for electric cars. China has now is eclipsing us in so many other fields. It used to be that biotech was the one area in which we were outpacing China. It turns out that China is now way ahead of us in drugs that are in clinical trials than the US is. China is way ahead of us in patents every year. So they are patenting their tech. You remember years ago we used to worry about China stealing our technology, ignoring our patent laws, and taking our ideas. Well, gosh, we better do the same thing. We better turn it around and start taking theirs, because I'll tell you, they are way ahead of us in patents. Any one of these would be a Sputnik moment to an administration, 50 years ago. And we are just seeing almost a shrug of the shoulders.
Okay, AI is obviously a hot topic. It seems to the questioner that the greatest opportunities are in healthcare and healthcare innovation. And what are the areas of research and development that you see as most pertinent in the AI domain?
Yeah. So I agree certainly that healthcare is one that is going to respond very well to AI. They seem to be in the healthcare community going about it very carefully, double checking results, keeping track of AI's predictions versus a doctor's predictions. And AI, of course, has so much more training than even an experienced pathologist will have in looking at various tests that are done. But I think we're going to see AI in so many other areas as well. I think that once we get some of the bugs out of it, I think, for example, AI could be faster than a paralegal in terms of saying, what are the precedent cases that are relevant to this one that need to be researched and put into a legal brief. And I think there are many other fields in which that will happen too. I'm not sure that AI is going to be, yet. It's not as good yet in terms of science precedent. Legal precedent, lawyers, I'm sure there are many lawyers in this audience, lawyers really look at precedent as setting the standard. In science, any paper that's more than about 5 years old is probably wrong. It's probably wrong in lots of ways. And so until we teach AI to, ignore science that was later supplanted by newer ideas. Science is a process. It's not a list of facts, whereas law is a list of precedents.
This question should be even more up your alley. As a geophysicist, if you had to bet on what saves humanity first, and there's kind of a question within a question here, but would it be colonizing Mars, AI breakthroughs, fixing our oceans, and I'm going to take moderator liberty and say, or is it remedying our climate crisis?
Okay, well, it's definitely not going to be colonizing Mars. I think that, we have Antarctica, we have a pole, where we don't have, there are some stations down there where people go in and out. but Argentina is the only country that has ever had a baby born in Argentina. So if we can't even really colonize the pole because of the problems with energy and resources and stuff like that, how are we going to colonize Mars? I mean, that just, to me, doesn't make any sense. I do think there will be benefits from trying to colonize Mars that will make it more energy efficient to support life support on this planet. So I think there are good things that will come out of it, but it won't be colonizing the planet. Climate change is, I think, the biggest long-term problem we have here. And I'm not sure how many of you have ever heard a talk given by Dan Gilbert at Harvard, who's a very famous researcher. And he talked about how the problem with climate change is it's a much longer time scale than weather. So people really respond, if it looks like it's going to rain, okay, let's cancel the picnic. But, the problem with climate change is it's indirect, it's in the future, and so people don't feel the need to do it. But for our children and grandchildren, it's going to be essential. So I would say that's the one we have to do. AI might be helpful in it, I'm not sure. But right now, of course, AI is just using a lot of power rather than helping us.
It's a question I think you at least partially addressed in your wonderful presentation. Is there a concrete role for private citizens and local philanthropy to backstop the science that's being cut at the federal level and also at the state level?
That's interesting. For one thing, I think it's already happening because you look at how much state universities are supporting their researchers off state funds and state fundraising and that sort of thing. So I think it already does happen. And state universities do definitely try to use their local resources to the extent they can. I think also there are some issues which are regional in their scope. And I think those are the ones that actually should be handled on a state level. It doesn't mean that government can't invest in solutions as well, but I think the states will have a better idea of how to solve those problems than the federal government would.
Here's a question that came in, and it's very similar to one that I have in my back pocket, so I'll ask it. The audience may or may not know that the Office of Management and Budget has done some things that are very likely to impact science. There is a new rule that was introduced in May that if it's actually goes into effect, would go into effect at the start of the next fiscal year on October 1st. That requires that every federal research grant has to be vetted and signed off on by the politically non-scientific leaders of those agencies. Could you put that rule in a broader context and tell us what will be the impact if that in fact goes into play?
Yeah, so I think the original sort of idea behind it was that government leaders had a few topics that they really felt were going to be critical to the future national defense and economic strength of America. And so they felt that if they could make sure that money is funneled only into those areas, that would be good. I think the problem with this is that there have been so many unexpected discoveries that came out of basic science that simply will not get funded under that. And, a good example is Jennifer Doudna's work with CRISPR-Cas9, which basically created the entire genetic revolution about being able to edit genomes. Without her work. And when you look back on it, why was she doing that? There were these novel creatures in high temperature hot springs that have become the foundation of the genetic revolution. And people were just curious about how do they live? How do they reproduce? So I think that I'm not going to say that funneling the money and concentrating into AI and quantum is not, a good use of our funds, but to ignore all of the advantages we've had from basic science and chance discoveries, I think is a huge mistake.
And there's a small caveat that I overlooked. In signing off on those grants, they would need to be consistent with the president's agenda. That's in the rule.
And as I say, the president's agenda is not necessarily, it's really focused on today. And I think so much of science is really focused on tomorrow and the future for our children and grandchildren.
Our final question, and quite a few people have asked this question or voted on it. In retiring as president of the Academy, are there things that you would like to be able to say now publicly that you were, that maybe you were forced to have a more diplomatic approach to in your previous tenure?
Well, I'm not sure I still want to say those things publicly because I want to set up my successor for a lot of success. And I don't think I can do that if I start saying things that he then might have, that might get branded on the institution and then he has to deal with. So.
Very diplomatic. Marcia, thank you so much.
Well,
this has been a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone. Great questions.